doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.
Hi, I'm Vince Molinari, and welcome to FinTech TV's The Impact Show. And we are broadcasting from the iconic New York Stock Exchange. I have two guests that are repeat guests, two guests that are friends, domain experts, excited that I didn't even know that they were friends and collaborators. So gonna be a great segment today. I want to bring forward Hubert Danso, who is the CEO and chairman of Africa Investor, or AI Group, and Matt Diserio, president of Water Asset Management. Welcome to the show, guys.
Great to see you again.
Well,
Great to be here.
Absolutely delighted to have you both. I wanted to start off with you, Hubert, if I may. Give us a little update, if you would, on the African institutional investment community on climate agenda, with a little bit of emphasis as it relates to water, making water investable. We're starting to hear more and more about water as an asset and something that's investable. Can you give us a little perspective from your side?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Vincent, and always a pleasure. And again, congratulations to you and your excellent team there at FinTech TV for the really impactful work you're doing, particularly with our friends at the New York Stock Exchange.
Thank you, Hubert.
Just jumping into the question here, as you know, Africa needs about $3 trillion worth of investment capital for our Paris Agreement aligned nationally determined contribution projects by 2030. And in terms of water, Africa's water infrastructure investment needs are around $30 billion a year in capital investment, which excludes maintenance. And that's really to close the supply-demand gap and improve the quality and management of drinking water and sanitation services across the continent. So within that 30 billion per annum, there's about a 15 billion a year investment deficit, which we believe is a unique institutional investor public partnership opportunity for governments, investors, development financiers alike, really to address this climate adaptation need of the continent, aligning and also unlocking both social as well as commercial dividends. So to address this, the African Green Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is an African Union convened and supported but African institutional investor-led global investment platform, which was really set up to catalyze private capital for Africa's climate transition, now has water as one of its priority investment segments. So why are we doing that? We're doing that because we're essentially motivated by the major public-private sector collaborations that we're already seeing moving pretty rapidly across the continent to attract and mobilize sophisticated institutional capital. The fact that the governments across Africa are already embracing and shifting focus to include raising non-fiscus finance through the proven investor water utility infrastructure model, which has been successfully used to attract long-term institutional pension and sovereign fund capital in many countries around the world, to pardon the pun, is a watershed moment to making African water investable to those, that global 150 trillion plus pool of global capital really looking to align with the climate agenda. So just to round up here, our investment strategy for water is really being to establish the African Water Investment Platform, AWIP, which is a specialist water-focused investment vehicle for African and global institutional investors to develop and invest in the continent's bankable water infrastructure assets. So the African Water Investment Platform is sponsored by the African Green Infrastructure Investment Bank and our great collaborator, Water Investment Management, Matt's team out of New York. It's essentially going to be a private equity investment platform that will invest primarily in regulated water and wastewater utilities, long-term concessions, bulk water resource development, storage and transmission assets, and industrial water and wastewater treatment infrastructure on the continent. And just sort of understanding the public and the private sector dynamics and how important it is to get alignment. The African Water Investment Platform fully supports and is aligned with a number of different things, principally Africa's water, our investable water nationally determined contribution project, the pipeline. It's also, very cleanly and neatly aligned with the high-level international panel on investment in water in Africa that's just been launched. And it also supports the African Union's program for infrastructure development in Africa and their water investment scorecard initiative, and also the African Union's 5% institutional infrastructure investment agenda, driven by African pension funds and sovereign wealth funds to be able to deploy more capital to assist Africa's green transition. So perhaps let me stop there and just let Matt say a few words, or back to you, Vince.
No, I will tell you, Hubert, today is no different than every time that I speak to you. I learned so much. I'm blown away with the amount of knowledge that just overflows. So thank you for educating me and helping educate our audience on everything that is happening here. And what a great foundation to transition to Matt. So Matt, water asset management we've gotten to know super well through FinTech TV, the Impact Show, and of course with our colleague Jeff Gitterman. You are our domain expert when it comes to everything and anything on water. So it warms my heart to see both of you working together and really this bridge building from New York to the continent of Africa. So well done. But I wanted to ask you specifically, African water, it's becoming investable. I know the way you quantify in your analytics and look at it. How do you see this as investable for global investors, African institutional investors? What's your lens showing you right now?
Well, yeah, thanks, Vince. As you know, we've been investing exclusively in companies and assets around the world that ensure water quality and water supply since 2006. We've managed money for sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, large institutional investors in these assets for a very long period of time. And what that's done is it's given us a window into really what works best and what works not so well around water, and what are some of the factors that are essential to drive that long-term capital towards water-related infrastructure. And what's exciting is that there are many different entities, and many of which Hubert is working with on the African continent, that is seeking to understand some of the commonalities around regulatory infrastructure. Really, the first thing is the regulatory infrastructure. That's essential. And by the way, that exists in many different parts of the world, that is able to attract, that creates an environment that's able to attract the institutional capital that's looking for clear, predictable, enforceable regulation that ultimately provides what people refer to as transparency, long duration opportunity, and regulatory certainty. And one of the things we've done is, because of the experience we've had investing in wastewater utilities all over the world, we've been working with regulators around the world to sort of cherry pick really what the best practices are from a regulatory perspective that have enabled these other countries outside of Africa to attract really hundreds of billions of dollars over decades, not only to build the infrastructure, but as importantly to maintain it. Water is one of the most capital intensive of all industries, and the regulatory regime that I'm referring to that exists in many different parts of the world creates what's called like an economic flywheel that not only attracts the initial capital, but as I said, as importantly, the additional capital that's required to maintain the infrastructure. And some of the common factors that we've seen in this kind of regulatory infrastructure, regulatory regime, is one, trust building, providing regular, independent data, transparency, universal metering, full cost pricing, and really just a kind of an inherent nature of collaboration between ratepayers, investors, regulators, and the environment. And what we've seen is where you have all of those seats at the table filled in a collaborative format, the money flows, and it flows from the most sophisticated most highly qualified, well-financed institutions in the world. And most importantly, what does it do? It solves water and wastewater problems. And it ensures economic growth. It ensures public health and safety. It improves environmental outcome. And as you can tell, we've seen this many different times. We've been successfully investing in these companies for literally decades now, and we're excited to play a small role with Hubert in trying to grease the skids a little bit for the African continent to recognize and then ultimately implement some of these kinds of best practices.
Well, Matt, that's absolutely perfect, and I may just put something forth. As you had the table set, I might say you have the SDG wheel set, certainly focusing on SDG 17 and collaboration and so many of the other SDGs in your approach.
Well, I was just going to jump in because that's one of our favorite topics, which is we're biased, being water-focused investors and asset managers. We believe SDG 6 is the most important of all the SDGs because by solving water and wastewater, you make so much progress at addressing so many, just as you were starting to point out, so many of the other SDGs. You solve water, you make progress in solving food security, gender equality, smart cities, clean oceans, reducing conflict, increasing collaboration. The list goes on and on. So we actually believe that SDG 6 is the most important, and obviously that's where all of our focus and asset allocation goes towards.
Great.
I'm sorry. Exactly to that point, in Africa, we have our own equivalent. Of course, we support and subscribe fully to the Sustainable Development Goals, but we also have our African version of it called Agenda 2063, which has been key to also creating that market expansive platform called the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is launched last year. It's a $3.2 trillion economic trading opportunity and area, which is essentially the largest free trade area since the establishment of the World Trade Organization. And again, industry needs water. Our population in the next 10 years is going to be approximately 25% of the world's population, that youth bulge, that tech adoptiveness. So we are really thrilled and excited to have that Sustainable Development Goal 17 global partnership, because we already know that the most productive form of investment into any region is one that really has a knowledge transfer and a knowledge sharing dynamic and component. So we think partnering with water asset management on this investment platform is really going to have significant impact as we march boldly and proudly towards hosting COP27 in Egypt later on this year. So stay tuned.
Absolutely, and we're in overtime. Matt, literally 30 seconds. I want to just have this come forward. The African Water Investment Platform you're co-developing with the African Green Infrastructure Investment Bank and Water Asset Management. Give me 30 seconds on it.
Well, I mean, it's what the experience we've had of generating attractive market-beating returns for the last 17 years, investing in all companies water-related, but with a particular focus around water utility infrastructure is something that has, driven our strategy. It's driven our returns. It's enabled us to outperform the market for a long period of time. And there's an opportunity, as Hubert was describing, that ultimately is there in Africa if the right steps are taken. And what we're doing collectively, and it's not just Hubert and I, we're using the resources and relationships that we have in the water industry from around the world to try and do our part to at least facilitate the initiation of Africa as a great place to invest in the water industry.
Perfect. Well, Hubert, Matt, thank you both for joining us. Love everything that you're doing. Have to have you back with some updates as we move along. But thank you for joining today.
Pleasure.
Real pleasure. Keep up the great work there, Vince. All the best.
Thank you, my friend.
business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.